What's up, guys? Welcome back to the LTL Podcast. I am here with Steve.
Hello.
And this week's episode is going to be whatever the hell we feel like talking about. Obviously, it is opening week in the National Hockey League. Lots of games been going on. Already some interesting stuff to talk about. We're not going to really start analyzing, this team is 0-1. What does that mean?
Fire the coach.
Yeah,
Burn it down.
We're not going to sit here and talk about why the Rangers and the Islanders are actually worse than the Devils because the Devils won last night. We're not going to do that. That's silly. But we are going to talk about some interesting stuff. And I guess we'll just kind of start with some of the new rule implementations. They said they wanted to crack down on the cross checks, specifically in front of the net and in the corner and stuff this year. So, I guess A, tell me how you feel about that. And then B, have you really seen that be implemented as strictly as we thought they might? Or, what do you think?
So, honestly, it seems like that's been a lot of show because, the two games I've watched with the Rangers, I don't think they've called, any cross-checking penalties. I feel like it's kind of a waste in a weird way. I'm glad it's not like the slashing penalties, right? When they first changed that rule, it was every 3 seconds there was a whistle because they called someone for a slash, but I just feel like they made such a big show of it, and I haven't even noticed it,
Yeah, in the games that I've seen one kind of questionable cross-checking call in front of the net, but for the most part, it kind of does seem like the status quo. Obviously, I watched the Islander game the other night. Anders Lee got a cross-checking call in the corner, but I think they would have called that regardless because he kind of just blew the guy apart in the corner. So, I haven't seen anything that would lead me to look at this and be like, they're really too strict about this, or it's, or I honestly don't think it's a case of the other way either. I don't think it's not like they're not strict enough, honestly. I think it's I think the way they called it last year was a good middle ground. I think the way they're calling it so far this year is pretty much par for the course. Do I think the rule was necessary? I think to a certain extent it was kind of important to really define what is acceptable and what's not in front of the net, because it did seem to vary wildly from night to night, where there were some nights where, obviously, me being an Islander fan, you watch Anders Lee in front of the net. There's some nights where he would get 16 cross checks in the back and there was no call. And then there were other nights where he would take one or two and they would call it right away. And I just think we need to be mindful of the issue of not just calling a penalty because the guy falls down, because
Yeah.
Look, Anders Lee is 6'4", I think he's 6'4", 210 pounds or something like that. He's a big guy, right? So obviously when he's taking these cross checks, a lot of the times he's probably not gonna go down. He's 6'3", 235. He's a unit.
Yeah, he's a truck. Yeah.
So I just think we need to be mindful of if we're not going to call the cross check on Anders Lee because it doesn't put him down, we shouldn't call the cross check if a guy like JG Pajot goes in front of the net just because he happens to get knocked down. I think we need to look at the ferocity of the cross check regardless of the end result. I just think that's one thing. If they're going to try to knuckle down, it just needs to be consistent in that way. But I don't think I've really seen anything too heinous to this point.
Yeah, no, I haven't. The way they made it sound, I thought it was going to be way tighter, the call, especially in the front of the net. They pointed out specifically the front of the net, but I feel like it's just par for the course. They haven't changed their mentality necessarily on the ice about it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing because I think it's in a decent spot. I think we do get enough calls in front of the net, and then in the corner. I think maybe there should be more scrutiny in the open ice cross check, if anything else, because yeah, you shouldn't, if you're going for an open ice hit, you should be leading with your shoulder. You shouldn't be leading with your stick. I think that's kind of
Yeah.
the position where, to me, it's the most egregious because, I mean, when you're battling in the corner, you're battling in front of the net, like, use of your stick is just kind of the way the game goes. But lining up an open ice cross check or lining up an open ice hit, you shouldn't be leading with a piece of, composite material between your hands. Like,
Yeah, I feel like yeah, I mean yeah, I have nothing to build on that. It's just the truth. Like if you're trying to hit a guy in open ice and you cross check him, like it's got to be a call every time. I don't care how little or how much you use the stick. It's like it's more of the intent, you know? Like if you get your stick up while you're trying to hit a guy at open ice, I think it's got to be a call.
yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of those things where I think, like I said, that's the area where it tends to be the most noticeable, and the most unnecessary, I think. Speaking of discipline, we have some suspensions already. Gabriel Landeskog was suspended for 2 games. Mark Scheifele finished his suspension from the playoffs last year, so he's eligible to play again. And Dylan Larkin was suspended a 1 game for basically punching Matthew Joseph right in the face. I guess I'll start with my opinion on this one. I think it was pretty warranted, honestly. It's the first game of the season, and there's really no reason to throw the hit that Joseph did. It was a dirty hit. It was a hit from behind. It was in the numbers, into the boards, dangerous hit. Luckily, Larkin was not hurt because we've seen hits like that result in head and neck injuries too often. And if I'm Larkin, I'm mad. Like it's game 1. The season just started. We're all trying to just get back into it. There's an
And this
82
guy's already
game
trying
leg.
to kill me.
Yeah, like there's an 82 game schedule ahead of us. Why are we doing this in game 1? This game ultimately probably will not mean a whole lot considering it's game 1. So
And there's 81 more.
I think it was warranted. Do I think he deserved suspension? I mean, probably. You can't you can't grab a dude's shoulder and then feed him a fist sandwich. Like,
Yeah, no. If anything, my only complaint with this is that the suspension call didn't go both ways. Like, I feel like if you're gonna ban Larkin for the reaction to, you have to ban the other guy for the hit. Like, even if the hit's not called on the ice, like, that was a dangerous and stupid play. Like you said, it's game 1. Why? And not even just game 1. Like, you're the defending Stanley Cup champions, and you're playing the Detroit Red Wings. Like, is there really a reason to go out there and try to hurt somebody, especially their best player? Like, why? So I think just for like the stupidity and like the needlessness of it, he should have got a game 2. And I probably would have been like, okay, whatever.
yeah, I mean, not to put down Matthew Joseph at all, but you're not the kind of guy that should be getting away with hitting a guy like Dylan Larkin, who's one of the most respected players in the NHL. Like, you're some 4th line 24-year-old who's trying to scrap his way through the league. Like, it's your 3rd season. Larkin's been playing in this league for 7 seasons now.
Pretty much since he was 18, yeah.
He's the captain of one of the most storied franchises in the NHL, and you're just some plug who, let's be honest here, got really lucky that he didn't give him a concussion. So,
Yeah, I mean,
like, I'm not trying to put down Matthew Joseph. Everyone has a role to play, but you shouldn't be hitting anybody from behind like that, regardless. But specifically not a guy like Dylan Larkin,
yeah, I just don't get like why. Like, what was the point? Was he like it? It's almost like you're just trying to hurt somebody when you throw a hit like that.
Yeah, like a couple, like 6 inches from the board head first. Yeah, that's not a hockey play. Like,
you literally just look at that and you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna murder this man on the ice. Like, I'm gonna just take him out. It's like, why? It's not like he was like lining the hit up and Larkin fell over and then he hit him. It's like, no, he was already like that, and you just like were like, yeah, I'm gonna do this anyway.
well, yeah, I mean, for anybody that watched the Islanders and the Hurricanes game, there was a point where Brock Nelson was lining up a hit on, I think it was Sebastian Aho behind the net, and Aho got tripped up by, I think it was his own teammate, and he started to go down, and he just kind of face planted into Brock Nelson's like upper chest essentially. And it's like that kind of hit, there's nothing Brock could have done. He was lining up the hit shoulder to shoulder. The guy just fell face forward into him. But this was like, hey, Larkin's along the boards. I'm just going to elbow him in the back of the head and see what happens.
Yeah, like, I'm going to roll the dice on this one and see if I don't actually kill him this time.
So I think
Larkin's like battled some injuries like in the last couple of years too. So I don't blame him for getting up and reacting the way he did. Like,
oh yeah, no,
he's finally back in for an 82 game season after how many injuries he's had. Yeah, I'd be kind of mad if some guy tried to kill me opening night.
Yeah, man, it was just one of those things. I think that Joseph, Larkin got the 5 minute in the game misconduct. I think that Matthew Joseph also should have gotten the same thing. But I don't think he was penalized. So I guess it's something to look out for next time the Lightning and the Red Wings play. I'm sure Tyler Bertuzzi will have something to say about that kind of hit. So we'll see what happens in regards to that. Speaking of injuries, also some interesting news out of Toronto, almost as if like I have a crystal ball, which I don't. I just have a pair of eyeballs and a brain. Peter Mrazek already hurt. He had to leave the game against the Senators the other night, and Jack Campbell had to come in and finish it. We haven't gotten an update as to Mrazek's condition so far, but it puts the Maple Leafs in a really, really bad spot. They actually had to sign a player to an ATO, an amateur tryout, just to have a backup tonight because their cap situation's so messed up. So,
bro, it's so
I guess like
Toronto, right?
My question is, where do you go from here? Like, you just have this kid on an ATO for the next like 7 games while Mrazek's hurt. Like, what do you do?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I'm glad I'm not being paid as much as Kyle Dubas is to figure it out, because yeah, they're kind of like, for lack of better terms, they're kind of fucked. Like, they banked so hard on like these 2 goaltenders who, Jack Campbell was good last year. He deserves a job, but like, you went out and signed Peter Mrazek, who's made of glass, to back up an untested rookie, essentially.
Which, I mean, not for nothing, Jack Campbell also can't stay healthy. I mean, he missed time last year. He missed like a week and a half at one point with a groin injury. In the beginning of the season, he was hurt. So you're kind of playing with fire now, because if Campbell goes down, I guess you have to waive somebody, right?
Yeah. Do you think it's funny, like, Toronto can't seem to keep their goalies healthy. Do you think it's like something with the workload they make them take in every year? Because before Freddie Anderson started taking getting all those injuries for them, he was playing like 60, 65 games a year. So do you think it's just like something to be said, they ride their goaltenders too hard? Like, Jack Campbell at one point, I think, started something crazy, like close to 20 straight down the stretch when he was hot.
I think part of it with Freddie Anderson was that, I mean, he never really had a backup, right? Like, from the day he got there, it was clear cut, bona fide, he's the number one. And he never really had a backup that could play more than like something along the lines of maybe 15 to 20 games comfortably, in terms of that's how many games you're willing to risk essentially by starting your backup, and it's kind of just weird that they know that fact, where Anderson clearly demonstrated that you need a goalie system that's going to support your starter. I mean, a lot of teams in the NHL now are going towards this kind of 41-41 1A 1B split. Not every team, and not every team that does it is successful, but when you look at the Islanders, the Rangers, the Capitals, the Maple Leafs, clearly that was the goal this year. Last year with the Dallas Stars, they kind of had that similar situation. In fact, the Dallas Stars currently have essentially 3 healthy goalies, because Ben Bishop's hurt on the roster, although Braden Holtby's now also hurt, so I don't know what they're going to do. But
I'll leave Jake Ottinger, but
Yeah, I just mean like in terms of the cap, it's kind of weird. Like they're riding three goalies, so like somebody scratched every night. Like I don't know. That's a whole other weird situation. But I mean, I guess this is kind of the trend in the NHL is to go towards this 1A 1B system. But does it make a lot of sense to do that when both your goalies are basically made out of glass, essentially? And I think there is something to be said for the way Freddie Anderson's body deteriorated because of the lack of a backup. And I also think that there's something to be said for just how hard it really is to be a goalie on this Toronto Maple Leafs team. There's really, even the nights when the Maple Leafs are putting up 4, 5, or 6 goals, you're still getting a little bit of a workout because the defense is just kind of porous. So that could definitely be something, or it could also just be a case of we just signed goalies who are notoriously hurt all the time, and now we're kind of surprised when, oh God, Peter Mrazek's hurt, and both of our goalies in the AHL, Scott Ian and Joseph Wall, are also hurt. So,
Oh, jeez. Like, I can't get any more Toronto than that, right? Like,
you want to hear something even funnier?
what?
This is the last year that Toronto is still paying Phil Kessel $1.2 million on their dead cap. They're still paying this guy.
They're still paying him, and that money realistically is kind of screwing them over.
Because it still counts against the cap. Like,
Yeah.
Sure, the Islanders are still paying Rick DiPietro, but that hasn't counted against the cap in, like, 5 years. So, it's kind of irrelevant. But, I don't know. I mean, I think Toronto really... I mean, we don't really know how badly Peter Mrazek is hurt. But, I mean, you're not starting this kid. There's no shot you're putting this Alex Bishop kid in the game if you can avoid it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, Sheldon Keefe said it's not looking like it's going to be LTIR for Mrazek. That's not exactly the most confident sounding thing I've ever heard in my life.
Well, how long was Freddie Anderson day to day for them last year?
Yeah. So, I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see kind of what goes down with Toronto. But, I mean, this was something that we talked about when we did our season preview, that both their goalies kind of have an issue with staying healthy. And bada bing, bada boom, 2 games into the season, Peter Mrazek blows out his groin again. It's like, oh, okay. Good. So.
It's almost as if we could have seen this coming.
Almost. Not, again, and I don't mean to take this opportunity to kind of talk about the, kind of trash on the Leafs, but you saw this happening. So their schedule, luckily, for the next 2 weeks isn't the worst. They're home for a 3-game set against the Senators, the Rangers, and the Sharks. They have a nice 3-day break in between the Rangers and the Sharks game, and then they go on the road for a 3-day set to Pittsburgh, Carolina, and Chicago before having another 2-day break and coming home for the Wings. So they're not super packed tight on their schedule, but we'll see.
They also don't have too many really tough opponents in that matchup, like those matchups. So hopefully it'll be a couple easier games for Jack Campbell to get through.
I mean, the Rangers, the Penguins, and the Hurricanes are going to give you trouble, and even the Blackhawks are going to give you trouble offensively. You know that.
Yeah.
But the Sharks and the Wings should be an easier night. And then, I mean, the real question is if Mrazek is still out next weekend, that's a back-to-back game. You play the Sharks at home, and then the next day you play the Penguins in Pittsburgh. So now what do you do? Do you go 2 games with Campbell and risk getting him hurt?
Him getting hurt, yeah.
I think as much as you don't want to put him in this position, I mean, do you start the kid against the Sharks? I mean, you're not starting him against the Penguins, right?
No shot. The Penguins are still like a decent team, like halfway decent team. They're not very good, but
like, do you put him in at home against San Jose? Like, I guess you could.
and just cross your fingers, right? Because like Sharks really don't have many offensive threats, right? Like is Evander Kane's not playing because he faked his vaccine card, right? So
Can we ban him from the NHL? Can we do that, actually? Is that a thing we can do?
um, I mean the commissioner's office does technically have the power to ban somebody for life, yeah.
Because this all
He's
started last year when it was revealed that he was like, what, $30 million in debt somehow?
yeah.
And then the whole gambling thing. And then the mother of his child put him on blast on social media saying that he doesn't pay for anything, which I mean I guess that somewhat makes sense when you're $30 million in the hole. But
Yeah.
he's still out partying and drinking, and then the mother also alleged abuse, which he denied, and now he's being investigated for not only gambling on San Jose Shark games, which would be a whole other problem, but also faking his vaccine card, which is a federal crime, I'm pretty sure, in Canada. So now, like, what do we do with this guy?
I mean, honestly, if he's gonna get banned for life for anything, it's going to be for the gambling.
Or if he gets thrown in prison for faking a vaccine card.
Yeah, that would be getting banned for life though by the league. That would just be like getting banned for life by the society.
Because society.
But I mean, there's something to be said for getting him out of the league, right? Like he's detrimental to like the image and like the team as a whole. Like he's no matter who you are or how like friendly you are in the locker room, you're not going to want to associate with a guy who's literally being investigated for multiple felonies.
Yeah.
Like it can't be good for team morale, right? Especially when he's wearing a letter for your team at one point.
Apparently, you can be. This is just a quick search on Google, so if this is incorrect, Canadians, I apologize. This is just the first thing that popped up. Um, Two airline passengers entering Canada from the United States were fined 16 grand each, which is about 20,000 Canadian dollars, and apparently the fines can run up to $750,000. So, huh?
Where's he gonna come up with the money? He's still paying back that hotel.
Yeah. Well, I I don't know. I think we need to ban him from the NHL, but that's just my opinion. I mean, maybe that's a knee-jerk reaction, but I think he needs to. I don't know why like San Jose hasn't just. I mean, I think I know why. Actually, saying that, I think San Jose is waiting for the league to do something so they don't have to buy him out and pay the cap hit.
Yeah.
They're probably like waiting to be thrown that bone, like, hey, NHL, like if we just like suspend him forever, we could just drop the contract, right? Like we don't have to pay this
Or
fucking guy.
or they might be waiting for him to like breach the terms of his contract or something, so they could suspend him indefinitely and terminate the contract, you know. And then maybe it won't count as heavily against the cap, like the league will alleviate it, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. Very weird times in Evander Kane's life, I guess. I do want to talk about some contracts that have been signed recently. Brady Tkachuk signs a 7-year, $8.3 million contract with the Ottawa Senators. And Charlie McAvoy signs a contract extension, 8 years, 9.5. So we'll start with Brady Tkachuk. What do you think about this contract extension? Do you think it's good money? You know, what do you think he means to the Senators? What are your overall thoughts on this contract extension?
Well, when we talked about it the other day, I think it's the term. The term I'm fine with. Honestly, the money isn't even that big of a deal because Ottawa's got money to burn, and this is a guy you're building around. So why not pay him what he wants to keep him? You know. But he's, 22 years old, 21 years old, and he's already wearing a letter for that team. Like, they're paying him essentially for more than his on-ice ability, which is, I mean, he's one of the best. He's probably one of the best players on that team. So, they're paying him for both that and his, like, the leadership ability he brings every night. that they seem to really value.
Yeah, I mean, this contract takes him until he's 29. You're getting 7 years out of it. And we're seeing the Senators start to kind of put that core together. Brady Tkachuk is on a 7-year deal now. Drake Batherson is on a 6-year contract. Thomas Chabot is on his big boy contract. He's on year 2 of an 8-year contract worth $8 million. We're starting to see the pieces kind of start to slide into place here for the Senators and the future vision of what this team's going to be. I didn't even realize the Senators signed Michael Del Zotto. That's hilarious. This is kind of a big contract year for them. Chris Tierney is up. Josh Norris is going to need a contract. He's an RFA, obviously. Alex Formenton's going to need a contract. Logan Shaw is going to need a contract. Josh Brown. This is a year where they have a decent number of contracts that are coming up, and they're still paying Bobby Ryan and Dion Phaneuf, funnily enough. So, the good thing about the Senators is they have a crazy amount of draft picks this year. They have their first-round pick. They have 2 second-round picks, 3 third-round picks, a 5th, a 6th, and then 3 seventh-round picks. So, they have the leeway, and they can make moves, and currently they still have $11 million in cap space, almost $12 million. So I think it makes sense to sign Brady long term now, especially because we've seen in the past a lot of players kind of jump ship away from Ottawa when their contracts are due. By signing Brady now, you're not having to worry about when he turns 26, what are we going to do? Are we going to lose our franchise player to unrestricted free agency? Are we going to lose, our captain probably by that point to unrestricted free agency? So
the other thing is,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was say the other thing is you're buying into those years. You don't have to worry about his value inflating. Like, you've already got him signed. So if he does become, say, like a 110-point player or something ridiculous, and he's realistically worth like 10 or $12 million on the open market, you've got him signed for 8. Like, there's value in that.
I mean, absolutely. And there's not as much risk, in my opinion, with a contract like this as some other players, because like you pointed out, Brady doesn't just bring the offensive game. He brings that physical edge. He brings that kind of roughness, that chippiness that every playoff team needs. Every championship team kind of needs a guy like Brady. And his leadership role, it's either going to be him or Chabot wearing the captaincy at some point for this team, I have to think. And
they're the 2 cornerstones, right?
You can do far worse on captaincy than Brady Tkachuk, honestly. I think he's perfect captain material because I don't really know how his speaking abilities are. I don't know how he is in the locker room. But when you watch your captain go out there and he just blasts somebody through the end boards, and then he goes down the other end of the rink and scores a goal, that's the kind of guy that you want to follow because of his example on the ice more than anything else. So I think it's a great signing. I'm really happy for Brady Tkachuk. I'm really happy that we're going to get to watch him actually play as opposed to sitting up in a press box because of some dumb contract dispute. And I think depending on how this next round of contract negotiations go with some of their more important players, maybe we're kind of seeing a little bit of a change in tune from Ottawa management from before, where before it was, I'm not paying my players. Erik Karlsson's not worth $10 million, and then you lose Erik Karlsson, So
before he got injured too.
Yeah, you lose the best offensive defenseman in the NHL, arguably probably a top 3 defenseman period in the NHL at that time, because you didn't want to pay the guy what he was worth. Okay.
When you had the money to burn.
Yeah, so fingers crossed for all you Ottawa Senators fans out there. I'm personally hoping that this team lives up to its potential and doesn't fall apart due to stupid, dumb monetary problems, and that the ownership just signs the checks and lets the GM do what he got to do and leaves the team alone. So we'll go on over not too far down. We'll head down south a little bit, down to Beantown. Boston Bruins have signed Charlie McAvoy, a 23-year-old defenseman, to a 8-year, $9.5 million contract extension that kicks in next year. He's currently making $4.9 million. What do we think about this contract?
Again, the price is a little steep, but you can't put a price on signing your franchise player, because it's him, and the Boston Bruins of the future are going to be built around him and Pasta. Like, because Bergeron's already 35-ish. Marchand's not that far behind him.
Krejci's
so
gone.
It's like, yeah, Krejci's literally gone. So I think it's just a good move to keep him locked up and in place, because now that's one question you don't have going into your rebuilding or retooling phase. Like, okay, well, we got our number one defenseman. That's something we don't need. You know?
Yeah, and again, this is one of these contracts that you're buying up essentially, honestly, the prime of his career. This takes him until he's going to be 31, 32 years old. You know, it kicks in next year, so probably closer to 32. By the time this contract is all said and done, you're buying, you know, a late career renaissance notwithstanding, which we've seen before, essentially the best years of his career. And to do so at 9.5 when, who knows, maybe further down the line he's actually worth 10, 11 million. If the cap keeps going up, that wouldn't very much surprise me at all. If you start seeing contracts like that being handed out more readily, then yeah, I mean, look, 9.5 for what he is now, maybe it's a tiny bit steep. You could maybe argue right now he's only like an $8.5 million player, but are you really going to split hairs that much when Charlie McAvoy means as much as he does to the Boston Bruins? Probably not. And he's one of these guys that, you know, when he first came in, he started playing underneath guys like Zdeno Chara. You know, he started playing underneath guys like, I don't know, Boychuk was gone by that point. But like, he played under these veteran defensemen, and as these guys started to move out of positions or age out of positions, you know, we saw him get better and better. I mean, he's been one of these guys that every single season you can point something and say, oh, he's doing that better this year. You know, oh, he's skating a little bit better. Last year, his offensive numbers in the beginning of the season really weren't all that great. But you could point to it and say, oh, you know, he's really cornerbacking this penalty kill this year, you know, with Zdeno Chara not being around. So I think it's a great signing. I love Charlie McAvoy. I love watching him play on the ice. And, you know, I guess one of these things that's nice about it, towards the end of the contract, it's only a modified no-trade clause. So he submits a 10-team trade list as opposed to a full no-move clause. So you have a little bit of an out towards the end of the contract if for some reason he starts to just fall off a cliff, which...
He hits you with the Drew Doughty situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a whole other issue. But it's just kind of funny to me when we look at some of these contracts. You know, and I bring this up a lot, but it really is kind of funny when you look at these contracts, and it makes you kind of appreciate, you know, a lot of the players on your teams that are like criminally underpaid. You know, like Adam Pelech and Ryan Pulock are only going to be making 5.75 and 6.1 essentially for the duration of the rest of their career. And you know, obviously the big thing there is they don't put up the offensive numbers that a lot of these guys do. But I think
still two quality defensemen though, making like not that bad money, honestly.
I mean, honestly, as a pairing, they're probably top. I would say they're a top 10 pairing in the NHL together, just in terms of their ability to control the flow of the game with their defense. You know. But I also think in a few years we're going to be looking at that McAvoy contract and saying, wow, you know, he probably could have been getting $11.5 million by now, you know, if the cap keeps going up. So, you know, good for the Bruins to kind of get that contract locked up and under wraps. Don't want to deal with any nonsense about losing potentially, I mean, essentially, you know, your best player at this point, I would say. In terms of his all-around game. And we'll talk about one more contract extension. Mika Zibanejad signs a 8-year contract for $8.5 million. So this contract kicks in next year. He'll be 37-ish by the time it expires, and it's a full no move clause for all 8 years of the contract. As a Rangers fan, how do you feel about this deal?
I mean, the real thing is we had to sign him to something, right? We weren't going to let him go. So, I mean, the Rangers were really set on from what I understand, the Rangers were really set on the number, and he really wanted the 8 years, and that was where like the compromise came in. They gave him the years, and he took the money the team wanted. So, the real thing is if he can stay healthy and stay consistent, I think it'll be a fine contract for the duration of his prime, because he has proven he does have a good ability to score goals when he's healthy. I mean, he scored 41 goals in 57 games or whatever it was that couple years ago. So he is the Rangers' #1 center, and I feel like it's just smart to get that locked up. It's one less thing to have to worry about going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the full no move clause for all those years is a little bit worrying towards the back end, I think, but the Rangers I mean, they're in a position at this point where they should be taking that next step. Like, they should, for all intents and purposes, be a playoff team this year. You know, Panarin is 29, Kreider is 30, Zibanejad's 28. They go out and they load up the big guns, get some pretty big names like Barclay Goodrow, Ryan Reeves, guys like Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere, who Caco needs a contract this year. They're looking like they're starting to kind of settle into the NHL. Jacob Trouba's still making $8 million. He's 27, so he's starting to hit the prime of his career. And then, Adam Fox is going to need a contract this year, and I do want to ask you kind of what your opinions on that are. But, Shesterkin has finally, or not finally, I mean, well, I would say finally, in terms of, like, it did take him a little bit to come over, just like Ilya Sorokin. He finally came over a couple years ago, and he's looking rock steady, as he always has. Georgiev is 25, so, you're kind of in a position now, and then, obviously you have Ryan Strome, who's 28, who's currently on COVID protocols, but, you're in a position where a lot of your guys are starting to hit their prime. When your best players are turning 28, 29, 30, that's kind of where you want to start making the playoffs. That way, by the time they're 31, 32, 33, with those veteran presence, you're just making those deep runs, I think that this year is going to tell us a lot about who Mika Zibanejad is, because, we all know what happened last year. He wasn't very good. His stats were hyperinflated by those games against the Flyers. Everyone in New York knows that, I think that this year is going to kind of tell us if he's back to the Zibanejad that we know he can be. And look, we don't need him to be a 60-goal scorer like he was on pace to be 2 years ago. I think the Rangers would take 35 goals every single season without question for the kind of player that he is.
100%.
I'm very interested to watch him this year. As much as I like to make the memes and the jokes about Zibanejad and his season last year, I'm not rooting for the guy to fail, except for when he plays the Islanders. I think that this is going to tell us a lot, because if he has another season like he did last year, there's going to be some questions, Certainly there's going to be some questions specifically regarding the fact that a lot of people were speculating that the Rangers weren't going to sign Zibanejad, and they were just going to take whatever money they were going to give him and put it towards the Jack Eichel trade. So, that's unfair to Mika Zibanejad to judge him against Jack Eichel, considering it's not like Jack Eichel was ever a Ranger, but that those are going to be the comparisons that are going to come up if Zibanejad struggles and Eichel gets healthy and plays the way we know he can. So it's going to be interesting to watch what he does this year, especially because, like I said, he's kind of one of those players the Rangers are relying on for them to take that next step. He's your first line center, one of your most important players on your whole team. So
Exactly.
Adam Fox, he needs a contract. He's going to be I don't know when his birthday's in February, so he's going to be 24 by the end of this year, or by the end of the season, I should say. Still restricted free agent, coming off of his Norris Trophy season. How do you think this is going to go down? Do you think that this is going to be the Rangers taking a look at McAvoy and Pelech and Pollock and saying, that's it, we got to buy into his competitive years now because we can't risk losing him? Or do you think that they're going to take the bridge approach?
No, I think you got to buy in now. He's ostensibly out like, if Artemi Panarin weren't on the team, he'd be the best player, you know? So I think you got to just buy in now. You got to give him like the Charlie Mack contract or something close to it, you know?
So if you could like hand pick a contract for him, what would kind of be your term and then your money? Are you thinking like an 8 by 9.5, kind of like McAvoy got? Do you think he's going to ask for a little bit more? What do you think?
I would see if I could get him on 8. See, if he's not interested in the term, right? I'd probably have to pay him more. But I'm thinking, if in a perfect world, if you can grab him by 8 by 9 flat, I feel like that'd be perfect. But if you have to inflate it a little bit to get the term, to have to sign him to something like Charlie Max at 9.5, I don't think you're really going to complain if you're the Rangers, because, I mean, he did just win a Norris Trophy. Like,
yeah, and I mean, he's the best offensive defenseman the Rangers have had in a very long time. I mean, even on those really, really good Rangers teams in the mid-2010s, there wasn't like an Adam Fox type defenseman, I don't think, honestly. I mean, Del Zotto was probably the most premier offensive defenseman that you had, and no offense, Michael Del Zotto, even in his prime, he's not even close to what Adam Fox is now. So
no, and then, I mean, Adam Fox is realistically the player that team needed that probably would have put him over the edge. Which is funny to think you get him now after your hyper competitive years.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, I think this Rangers team is in a really, really good spot to kind of enter that next competitive window, and it would not surprise me to see them making deep runs kind of soon. I mean, there's still a couple of things that I think they're working out. Filipinos looked really, really good to begin the season, which is very important for them, considering I do think he's going to eventually be the second-line center that they need to play behind Zibanejad, where Zibanejad can kind of just focus on the offense and do his thing, whereas Hedl brings a little bit more of that 200-foot game, kind of like your, Anze Kopitar, Jonathan Toews type player, which I think every championship team realistically needs. If you look at the last couple of championship teams, there's always been that center that's kind of taken on a lot of that burden. We look at those Pittsburgh Penguins teams, even in 16-17, who took on that defensive burden? Oh, it was just Sidney Crosby, one of the best defensive centermen in the entire NHL. So
one of the best centermen, period, in the NHL.
Yeah. Like, and then you look at, like I said, the Jonathan Toews and Anze Kopitars of the world. I think it's going to be important. So they're still waiting on him to kind of fully develop into that role. I still think the defense needs to fully kind of grow into their role. They're playing a lot of young defensemen this year. Niels Lundqvist, Keandre Miller, Libor Hayek, Ryan Lindgren, and Adam Fox are 23. But you wouldn't be able to tell that from the way they played. You'd honestly think that they were like in their prime already. But yeah, I mean, I think give the Rangers a couple of years and they should be making those deep runs again if all things go well. And obviously, Adam Fox is going to play a huge role in that. Assuming that they can get him locked up to a contract, which, based on the things that he said about the city and the team, don't really think it's going to be much of a problem at all, honestly. I can't really imagine Adam Fox having any real reason to want to leave the team.
He grew up a Ranger fan. He's always wanted to be a Ranger, and then he comes here and wins a Norris Trophy. I really don't think it'll be a hard sell to be like, hey, Adam, you want to stick around in New York?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. This is not an Oliver Ekman-Larsson in Arizona situation where he doesn't really have any ties to the city other than growing up there in terms of playing his career there. There's a lot of, first of all, what guy doesn't want to play in Manhattan? What guy doesn't want to play in Madison Square Garden? So you got that going for you. Again, not to be mean to Arizona Coyotes, but you're not exactly Gila River Arena is not exactly Madison Square Garden. Like, it just isn't. So obviously you got that going for you. The fact that he grew up a Rangers fan, the fact that he just seems to love everything about the team, I don't think it's going to be an issue at all. So, is there anything last minute you kind of wanted to talk about before we wrap up, or are you good?
I guess just to add on to that Adam Fox thing real quick, I'm interested to see how he develops under Gerard Gallant, because Gerard Gallant's done a pretty good job of developing young defensemen. I mean, look at some of the young guys that are like stepping in their prime now that played their formative years for him. Jay Theodore over in Vegas played his formative years for Gerard Gallant and in Gerard Gallant's system. And a guy that everyone seems to forget about, Aaron Ekblad. Aaron Ekblad played a couple of years in his formative stages, his rookie years for him. I think he won a Calder Trophy playing for Gerard Gallant. So it's like Gallant clearly has a touch or an ability to develop these young defensemen into the players they can be. So I'm really interested to see what he does with Adam Fox, who at this point already seems like as refined as it gets, right? Like, he's not a diamond in the rough. He's not like a project. Like, his game is almost as fully formed and complete as you would expect like a 35-year-old veterans to be.
I mean, there's still... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, there are, like, not to like oversell Adam Fox. I mean, there are still things he needs to get better at, but like for the most part, the things he does well, he does so well, you forget that he has like things he needs to improve on.
I'm interested to see how Gallant can develop the minutia of his game, because he already does everything you can ever ask a defenseman to do in the offensive zone, right? And the two guys that you named, Shea Theodore and Aaron Ekblad, are more offensive defensemen, right? I think really, defensively, I think Adam Fox is good enough. I would the Rangers like him to develop into that Nick Lidstrom where at both ends of the rink he's just an absolute terror? Yes, but if he never develops his offensive game beyond where it is now, or his defensive game beyond where it is now, as long as he's paired with a guy like Ryan Lindgren, you're really not going to notice it too much, I don't think. Because I think in his own zone, I would rate him as average to above average. He's not really elite, but again, do you really care that much? But I'm curious to see if Gallant can tap into that side of his game. It's just the little things, like sometimes he does try those Hail Mary passes and it leads to a bad turnover. But I mean, again, that's kind of just a risk you take with a guy like him. Look, Erik Karlsson served up pizzas up the middle his whole career. Like, it's not like he wasn't committing turnovers. So I think that's just what I'm curious to see, because again, look, if Adam Fox is the Adam Fox that he currently is for the rest of his career, he's going to be a fantastic player. There's no doubt in my mind. I'm just curious to see if Gallant can tap into those smaller, finer details, because to me it feels like when Gallant develops a defenseman, it's generally, like you said, painting in more broad strokes, kind of just bringing up these guys from an unfinished project, where, I mean, Adam Fox is kind of already complete, in a lot of ways. Like I said, if you didn't know he was 23, you really would think he's like 28, 29. Like, just based on the way he plays.
That's why I was saying, like, I'm interested to see how he could refine a guy whose game is already so complete, Yeah,
it's so I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch with Gallant, but you know me, I think Gallant was the right pick for the Rangers. Oh, they haven't won a game. Okay, they played 2 games. Relax, like let's.
And they only got blown out in one of them.
Right, which that was the Caps home opener. You can kind of forgive it. I mean, look, the Islanders let up 6 goals. Granted, one of them was an empty net, but going on the road to a team in their home opener, it's a difficult game. It's also your first game, so you're shaking off the rust. I'm talking about both for the Islanders and the Rangers specifically. That was their first games of the season, was going into somebody else's building and playing. It's a difficult game. You can kind of get a mulligan on that one, I think. I don't think anybody's going to take too much away from those games, really, at all. Um, Again, we're 2 games into the season. The Rangers force overtime in their home opener. They looked really good towards the second half of that game. They looked really bad towards the first half of that game.
Oh
Obviously, like, the coach is still working out the system. There's still kinks in the hose, so to speak. I think the only thing we need to really look at to this point is the fact that the Rangers have only scored 3 goals in those 2 games, which Gallant plus the Rangers should really be generating more offense, but it's 2 games. I'm not worried. Like, I picked the Rangers to win the wild card for a reason. If next week we come back and the Rangers have only won 1 or 2 games and they're only scoring 2 to 3 goals a game, then we can start to talk about it. But I guess the reason I'm bringing this up, I guess, is to just kind of preempt some of the more like gung-ho Rangers fans and Islanders fans, because I have seen some of the Islanders fans after the first game was like, "Oh, the team's terrible. Scratch this guy. Bring up the." It's 1 or 2 games. Let's pump the brakes. Let's calm down. All right. Like,
let's see what we got. We don't even know what we're working with yet. Like,
yeah. So that's just kind of my PSA to both Islanders and Rangers fans. Calm down. If you can take anything from the Buffalo Sabres for the past 3 seasons really, it's that they're the best team in October. And what did it mean at the end of the year? Absolutely nothing. So, relax.
pretty much.
Anything else you wanted to kind of hit on before we wrap things up here?
I don't think so.
All right, so next week we'll kind of start to, some of the teams by then will have played 4 to 5, 6 games. Maybe we'll start to talk about maybe some trends that we're noticing starting to develop. Obviously we'll just talk about some NHL news and kind of just see what goes on from there. So next week's going to be kind of another similar episode to this week, just generic hockey talk, see what happens in NHL. Unless something crazy happens, we'll kind of just go from there. So, look forward to next week's episode. I want to thank you guys for listening / watching if you're listening on the streaming apps or watching on YouTube. And we will see you guys again next time.